Egyptian government when it talks about sort of Nile rights. That being in terms of historical rights to the Nile, looking at other agreements such as the fact that when you talk about population, Egypt is one of the highest populations along the Nile. Looking at, of course, the climate. Egypt is, in fact, one of the harshest climates in terms of being a hot, arid climate along the Nile. So looking at rainfall patterns, Egypt has close to minimal, whereas a country such as Ethiopia receives up to 2,000 millimeters of rainfall a year, as opposed to Egypt's only a meager 150 to 200 millimeters. So there's various reasons in favor for Egypt's discussion of looking into the rights of the Nile.
But the fact is, the fact is that both countries, if at the moment we're taking a look in particular at Egypt and Ethiopia, both countries need to take a bigger share of the water out of the Nile because their populations are growing at such an alarming rate. And Minister, what is it? Your population's doubled in 10 years. You wouldn't be doing this unless you were seriously worried about how you were going to be able to cope with the extra number of people, the massive population growth you've got.
Well, first of all, whether we have a bigger population or not, it's in our right to use our fair share in terms of using the Nile River. As we all know, the colonial era treaty had been one-sided and excluded Ethiopia and the upper riparian states from getting their fair share. And now it had been around 10 years since we all started negotiating on the cooperative framework agreement, whereby most of the upper riparian states have ratified the agreement and signed it, except Egypt and Sudan are
and this is one, just let me help our viewers here. This is an agreement whereby states other than Egypt and Sudan, as you say, would be able to do not effectively what they like, but a great deal more with the river than they would before, and would not allow Egypt to have the power of veto over what goes on the upper reaches of the Nile.
Well, if veto had been allowed, there will be continuity of the unfair and unjust old treaty. That's what we oppose, and that's what we have realized as an obsolete mechanism for a shared growth. Our proposal, on the other hand, is that of ensuring mutually beneficial ways, where the cooperative framework agreement takes into account the interests of all the peoples in the region. So in that respect, I think we can use the River Nile for mutual benefits and for the joint growth of every country. Nile is a big river. It had been there, and it had been a source of relationship between the upper and downstream countries. And with the new development that we are that's taking place here, we think we can use it more constructively and with a win-win mindset. That had been the direction
Back with you in a minute, Minister, but Claire Pascal, in terms of the history of this, it's fascinating to read that there was a colonial agreement in 1929, another one in the late 1950s, all of which seem to be weighted in the favour of countries such as Egypt and Sudan, and damaging to those other countries that have the Nile flowing through it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here in London, which was, of course, instrumental in creating those agreements because they were essentially linked to British imperial interests. So, of course, they were giving themselves as much water as they could, and it's sort of interesting that Egypt is continuing that colonial legacy in the context of the region. And it's worth also remembering that those agreements fixed in place a sort of divide and rule construct, which was part and parcel of how the British Empire ran. And it would be very useful to get away from those divisive zero-sum game paradigms to try to create, as the minister was saying, a kind of zone of prosperity. Because right now we're thinking about the water just in the context of, will this leader be here or will this leader be there? But if it's in another location, it can actually act as a force multiplier for the economy. And then, for example, you can afford desalination plants, which would give you a different source of water. You know, there needs to be a rethinking of water use along the entire system.
Because
Egypt,
water is a weapon, isn't it?
Sorry.
Your book was called Global Warring, and there are many people who believe that the next major international conflict, world war, if there is to be one, let's hope not, but would be because of water shortages.
Yes, I mean, again, as you say, I hope not. I think that, you know, there's some pretty wise leaders in the region, but it will take a complete rethinking of geopolitics and geoeconomics and the geophysical changes that are happening, because of course this water agreement, which is, as you mentioned, kind of over 50 years old, assumes that the same amount of water will be in the Nile forever. But with climate change, we don't really know if that's going to happen. And as the minister said, it's actually very useful for a watershed region like Ethiopia to be involved in the river, because that gives it incentive to ensure the health of the river. If Ethiopia can't take out any water, why would they invest in making sure that the river is healthy? So there are a lot of different ways of working together to get away from the zero-sum game approach and create a new economy that will help bring other components in and create more stability and security.
Lamar Al-Hatto in Cairo, what is it going to take from the Ethiopians, for the Egyptian people and the government to be satisfied that they're not being put in a position where agricultural land could go to waste, where there won't be water supplies, where they are actually sort of suffering? What does Egypt need from Ethiopia?
I think it's really important to note that with any infrastructure project, dam or otherwise, but specifically when we talk about the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, that there's going to be positive impacts to this dam and there's going to be negative, and that's by default. That's with any infrastructure project. And this one isn't any different. That being said, the dam and sort of the impacts, looking at the impacts downstream on both Sudan and Egypt specifically, range, again, from positive and negative impacts. Now, what's important here is that with this infrastructure project, and in order for us to move forward, that we really begin to look at and focus on the win-win opportunities and solutions that can come about from this dam, and how Egypt can begin to cooperate with Ethiopia, and Ethiopians alike with the Egyptians, in order to find that common ground where they can both begin to actually approach this dam together. One particular actual solution would be an actual investment in this dam, and that would actually make things a lot of things move in the right trajectory when we can begin to talk about an actual sort of concrete solidification and unification of this collaboration between Egypt and Ethiopia.
Is it possible?
So that's one solution.
Do you think it's possible that in the event of increased tensions between the two countries, Ethiopia could use this dam as a means of switching off water supplies to those nations that it disagrees with?
Can I come in?
I'm going to get you in a second, sir, if I may, but I want to get the Egyptian point of view before I come to you.
I think it's important that the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi actually noted once that this in the launching of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, said it very publicly that this dam doesn't have to be a national dam. It can actually end up being a regional dam. And this was an invitation to both Egypt and Sudan and the rest of the region to actually become partners in this dam. And I think that that was a great step forward, one that we maybe didn't take at the time, but I think that it's very important that we should take today.
But Minister, it is an Ethiopian dam at the moment. It is not a transnational dam. Your reaction to the question that I put to Lamar Al-Hatto is what?
Ethiopia does not have such an intention. The only intention of Ethiopia is to use this water for production of electricity and ensure as well constant flow, regulated flow to the downstream countries. Let me give you one example. I think whenever we do such big dams, I think the benefits for the riparian states, especially for the downstream riparian states, is enormous. We have built a dam on the Tekeze River, which is quite big. But apart producing electricity for Ethiopia, the main beneficiaries of this dam are the Sudanese farmers. If you look into the northeastern part of Sudan, farmers there are getting more water, regular water, and the increase of the flow of water, even during the dry seasons, has been confirmed. The same would be true with the Nile Dam because during the dry seasons, all the downstream riparian countries will get regulated water and constant flow. I don't think water and development of our water resources can be a bone of contention between all these countries, because what we're doing here is incurring a heavy cost in the construction of the dam, but the benefits are going to be mutual. You know, we control siltation to the downstream countries. We also ensure regular high flow of water to downstream countries. So I don't think this myth of war related to water resources happens here.
Minister, you and the other guests might like to hear what some of our viewers are saying. These are some of the things that have been put on Facebook, first by Matt Davis. Diverting rivers is an ecologically dangerous practice, he says. One mistake and Egypt could become the next Aral Sea, which we know has sort of shrunk enormously because of water diverted from it over the last 25 years. And Amjad Adlan Awad Yusuf adds, as a Sudanese, we support our Ethiopian brothers to go ahead in constructing such a great dam. Egypt has taken more than their share in Nile waters. Cleo Pascal in London, tell us about the possibility of water being used as a weapon of war.
Well, if it were to be used, it would be considered an act of war and retaliation would be legitimate. One would hope that it wouldn't come to that, but I think the awareness of that being considered an act of war would limit its use in such a way. I think what would be more likely is that through climate change or other issues, less water appears in the dam than the dam is designed for, depending on the dam design.
And do you believe, as some people have suggested, that it could take 2, maybe 3 years to fill up the reservoir, and the water that's diverted into that at the time would therefore no longer be going downstream, and that could cause, if not long-term problems, then major problems in the short term?
I'll defer to the minister on that. It's a technical issue. I know that dams are becoming notoriously unpredictable. The Three Gorges Dam still isn't full, for example. So with
let's hear what the minister has to say.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take
Please.
you to fill this huge dam? And in the meantime, is it going to mean less water going downstream?
Well, first, allow me to respond to the first questions of the damage or the alleged damage that happened with diversions. What we are doing is rerouting the water from its original course a little bit so that we can start constructing the dam on the riverbed. So the flow of water to Sudan as well as Egypt has not been stopped. And I don't think using and developing water resources would be harmful. Humanity has been able to develop by controlling and developing its water resources. So this is not different in Ethiopia as well.
Well, I mean, look what happened, as the reader, as the viewer said, look what happened to the Aral Sea. I mean, it's empty now.
What we're going to do is to create big lakes which will add up to the amount of water that flows downwards. But also regarding the time needed for filling the dam, we're not going to do it in a completely irresponsible way. We are going to do it responsibly. We know water has to flow both to ensure the downstream countries.
Minister, I'm going to have to stop you. I'm going to have to stop you at that point. One final word from Cairo. Allama El-Hatto, do you believe what the ancient philosopher Herodotus, you find out all sorts of things researching this program, who said Egypt is the Nile and the Nile is Egypt?
Absolutely, that's true, but the Nile doesn't run only through Egypt. It runs through 11 riparian countries, and so it's not Egypt alone. However, there is something I wanted to just point out in reference to what the minister was saying. The tripartite committee, or the committee that was formed basically with experts from Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, and foreign international experts to assess the impacts of the GERD Dam on downstream countries like Egypt and Sudan. This committee has been working to investigate the socioeconomic, hydrological impacts, all the different various impacts on this dam that this dam will cause. The issue is that this report, it was intended to be released in January, and then it was postponed to February, and then finally postponed to May, where it's actually intended to be released today. The shocking part was that
I'm going to have to stop you. I'm sure if this program were 2 hours long, it would not be enough. Barakat Simon, Minister of Information from Ethiopia. Appreciate your time, Minister. Allama El-Hatto, we just heard from there out of Cairo, and Cleo Pascal talking to us from London. Thank you too very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Send us your feedback at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, David Foster, and from the Inside Story team, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.